Kate Falcha. Welcome to this new episode of Psychics and Psychos. And this time we're going to focus on a person, but the crime, technically the central crime, has not been completely solved. There's a trial coming up, supposedly the end of this summer. So I have to be kind of careful about what I say. So we're going to call this the death of Betsy Faria. However, there's a suspect, and we will be talking about her. But let's first talk about Betsy, because she is central, of course, victim to this situation. She was born in 1969, outgoing. She had a beautiful smile. She's described as never having met a stranger, full of energy, always on the go. She met her future husband, Russ Faria, while she was working at a local gas station. She took this as a second job to really get ahead in her real passion. She needed money, she was getting her real passion started, which was being a DJ. She had this company that she called Party Starters, and she would provide the musical entertainment for any kind of party. It was her passion. And she had a real knack for stirring up energy in a crowd and getting people dancing or playing games. And so she was really making a go of it. She asked Russ out, and he began helping her with the business. They were some of the very first people in DJing to use computers. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but they were doing really well. They got married in the year 2000, and together they raised two of her daughters from a previous marriage. They had this gigantic list of hobbies. They were into the outdoors. She played tennis. They went camping. They played cards. They were really into board games. After they got married, they decided to together return to their her previous insurance career. I suppose they weren't able to make enough money to support an entire family. Plus, it's really hard, to constantly be having your time at parties when you have small children. Anyway, she worked at a State Farm office, and it is at the State Farm office that she met a person central to our story named Pam Hupp, Hupp. She actually trained Pam as a new employee, and they worked together for a couple of years. Time passed, and eventually, I don't know if they went to different offices or if their employment situation just changed, but they lost touch with each other. However, they reconnected in January of 2010. Betsy had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. Russ, he said he didn't really think anything of them reconnecting their friendship. He said, I didn't think anything of it right away. They just walked together. It was kind of like Pam encouraging Betsy to get out to walk. So Betsy had a conversation with her father around this time that she wanted to provide some sort of trust of money for her girls because she felt her mortality. She was afraid that if she died when they were teenagers, that they would just flitter the money away. And she also feared that Russ would, as she so delicately put it, piss it away. This is what her father repeated that she said. So I guess she was the more level-headed business person. So she invited her dad to go to California, to go with her to her cancer treatments. And he said, okay, this was a one-time thing. And he said, okay. And they could spend that time kind of working out how to provide for the children should she be gone. When they got to the center where she was having her treatments, who's sitting there? Uninvited, unexpected, but Pam Hupp. And it was very uncomfortable. He said later that it was obvious that Betsy wasn't expecting her and Betsy was not pleased. But they couldn't talk. They couldn't do what they wanted to do as far as organize the money part. Pam really pushed herself into Betsy's life. She pushed herself into all of Betsy's remaining appointments, and she was relentless. Oh, I'll be there. It's okay. No problem. And any argument you put up. And unfortunately, Betsy and her family, they didn't have the ability to set really strong boundaries. You know, a different kind of person would have been able to just say, actually, no, thank you for the offer, but we want this to only be family. And then not be uncomfortable when Pam came up with a retort. Pam, as you are going to discover, because she is a convicted murderer, was impervious to argument. So Betsy seemed like she got better. She had her treatments and she seemed better. So in 2011, in November, they planned a cruise that they called a ship cruise that they called a celebration of life. And they invited a whole lot of family and friends. But before they were getting ready to leave, they found out that her breast cancer had metastasized and was terminal. So, you know, they all had said, you know, plenty of tears were shed. This was really difficult. But she decided to take the cruise anyway and use the good days that she had without being on chemo to play tennis, to be with family. She tried very hard to be upbeat about the whole thing and stay positive. Russ said, you know, she didn't want to be sad. She wanted to be as happy as she could be for herself and for those around her, especially for her children, up until the end. So then we come to the incident that spurred us on to do this in Psychics and Psychos. December 27th of 2011. Now, this is shortly after the cruise and shortly after her, getting her terminal diagnosis. So Russ had a regular game night every week with friends. Same night of the week, every week, same time, same friends. There were 5 of them, consistent as could be. So he texted Betsy at noon that day, and he said that, I'll pick you up at your mother. She was going to spend the time with her mother for a couple of days, and she'd be done that evening, and he would go to his game night, and when he was done, he'd pick her up and bring her home. Everything was all agreed. But later on, he got a text from her and said that Pam Hupp had offered to give her a ride home, and Betsy was kind of irritated. The tone of her text was irritated that Pam would not take no for an answer, that she pushed, and there were eyewitnesses to this, as you shall see. And so Russ actually thought nothing of it, went to his game, was with his friends all night at the game, just drive home, stopped to get some fast food, stopped to buy some dog food, came in, walked in the door, and found Betsy dead on the floor. Her wrists were slashed. He thought she had done this to herself because of cancer. But turns out the knife was in her neck and she had been slashed more than 55 times. So when he called, there's a 911 call. And when he called, he said, I think she did it to herself because I think she slashed her wrists. And the cops came in and thought, what are you crazy? I mean, obviously that's not what happened. But he was in shock. So Pam Hupp told the cops that the Faria marriage was troubled and that Betsy was unhappy, that she had the inside scoop. Russ was arrested. He was tried. He was convicted to life without parole, all based almost entirely on Hupp's testimony. But there was more to it than that, as we shall see. In 2015, new evidence came out. And eventually a judge acquitted him. His conviction was overturned. And so the murder of Betsy Faria was unsolved. So what was this new evidence? This is stuff that the defense did not know. 4 days before the murder, Betsy switched her primary beneficiary on a $150,000 life insurance policy that she intended to leave to her children. She switched it to Pam Hupp. So, parentheses, motive. Her 17-year-old daughter, after her death, said, I lost my mother and I lost my father. And her other daughter, and these are interviews that were done quite a bit later. The other daughter credited her mother's example of positivity that got the girls survived through this. They had their grandmother, and they were very close to her, but they lost everything. And to make a long story short, and we will go into the details, but just to not leave you hanging, in July of 2021, Pam Hupp was charged with Betsy's murder. She pled not guilty. Russ, he'd been, exonerated. He attended the press conference that announced the indictment, and he brought with him a small container of Betsy's ashes in his pocket. He said, "This isn't about me. It's not about Pam Hupp. This is about Betsy, and I wanted to represent that." So let's talk about how the investigation was mishandled. Now, I got a lot of this off the internet from all different news sources. I pieced it together, and I watched, it's like a docudrama. It's fake based on real, with Renee Zellweger playing Pam Hupp in a fat suit. Which is actually, I asked myself, did Renee Zellweger gain a lot of weight to be this character? So I actually looked it up, and it said, no, she wore a fat suit, and it was very controversial. But I thought they did a really good job because she looked a lot like her. Her mannerisms were very similar, especially her facial expressions. And even knowing that it was a fat suit, I had to really look. It was actually pretty well done. And the docudrama was done just a little tongue-in-cheek, just a little. And not in a disrespectful way, but to kind of shine a disbelieving light on Pam from the very beginning. So Russ, his investigation was mishandled. The police had tunnel vision from the first minute they went in, and he said, "I think she did it to herself." Boom. That was it. And you can hear them. There's a lot of the police interrogation is the film from the interrogation room is also on YouTube. And you can see that they had their minds made up and tried to fit evidence into the case that they had created in their minds and not pay attention to evidence that disputed the case that they had created in their minds. So this is like the most extreme form of tunnel vision you've ever seen, because he had 5 eyewitnesses that he was at his friend's house all night. And the story that they concocted, the cops concocted around this eyewitness testimony, his alibi was rock solid. He had phone beeps, that showed where he was, and 5 friends who testified under oath. And the cops just ignored all of it. They ignored the fact that Pam was the last person to see Betsy alive. She dropped her off at home and was the sole beneficiary of a $150,000 policy. And the prosecution withheld all kinds of crucial evidence about Hupp and the crime scene from the defense, and the defense didn't find out about it until after the conviction. And we'll explain what happened after that. So what did they withhold? There were 100 pictures taken of the crime scene. And it was quite clear, if you looked at these pictures, that there was no effort to clean anything up. Many of them were photographs of luminol, and there was no cleanup. And the police maintained that those pictures showed that they proved that there was a cleanup attempt and that the pictures have been lost. Untrue. The detective lied about it. I don't even think I have to say allegedly. I think he got in trouble for it. The Hupp interviews, they weren't provided to the defense, and they were almost completely destroyed before the second trial. There was a computer note, ostensibly from Betsy, about the money and her fear of Russ and everything, that was in her computer, but they were able to prove later that it was written in on a different computer and put into Betsy's computer. It's a good thing they weren't depending on me to do that. Nobody would have been convicted of anything. And there was no DNA. There was unidentified DNA that was not Russ's. There wasn't anybody in the families, and they never took Pam's DNA for the first trial. So it was a mess. The second trial, all this evidence was included. And in 2015, the conviction was overturned. Then the Farias had a lawsuit against the sheriff department for misconduct. I was pretty sure there was some repercussion there for not providing this evidence, and they got a $2 million settlement. So then the thing about Pam is the name of this docudrama, and I took notes on it. And so my handwriting gets a little scary in a couple of places. I hope you'll bear with me because this is really interesting. And Renee Zellweger did a really good job. Yeah, I have to say, having watched hours of interviews and interrogations, and Pam Hupp never saw a camera she didn't like. Renee Zellweger did a good job. I recommend that docudrama. So Troy, Missouri, 2 nights after Christmas, December 27th, 2011, there's a 911 call, and you can hear the 911 call. And in retrospect, the prosecution characterized it as feigned grief. Then there's quotes from Pam. Pam really said these things. She said, I'm really successful. I'm a pillar of the community. I'm a loving family woman. This is great. You'll find out why later. I took care of my mom until the end. So what happened to Betsy? It was hard on me too, she said. Pam said this. It was hard on me, probably more than on anybody. So if you're beginning to suspect a little narcissism, you would be on the right track. She said, everybody knows it was her husband who did it. Pam didn't like Russ, and there was definitely the implication, allegedly, that there was a bit of a competition going on. Who was more important in Betsy's life, Pam or Russ? Russ was unaware of it. He wasn't in the competition to his knowledge. Pam was. It was in her head. So the night that they were going to get together to play the game, Russ was at the game, and he was supposed to give his wife a lift home from her mother's house after the game night. But Pam insisted and showed up at Betsy's mother's house. And Betsy's mother and Betsy's daughters were there, and her sister, and they didn't want Betsy to leave. The daughters wanted her to stay with them. And there was a kind of a give and take, a tug of war, because Pam showed up, and Pam was like, oh no, I'm taking her. She wanted me to take her. And Betsy didn't say, well, I want to stay. Like I said, they had difficulty at really asserting their boundaries. She didn't want to go. She was annoyed. Russ could tell it in the texts back and forth. Pam was very pushy, and Betsy just could not get her to take no for an answer. And Pam capitalized on Betsy's nature. So Pam drove her home, and she was the last one to see her alive. So the evening ended. Russ was at his regular game night. it ended. He said goodbye to everybody. He stopped to pick up some fast food. I think maybe he stopped at Taco Bell. I can't remember. And went into, the pet store and got a big bag of dry dog food. It's all on camera. And he got home and pulled up at home to find his dog in the front yard. And there was snow on the ground. And he was like, well, what are you doing out here? Why is this dog outside? He thought that was very unusual. So found Betsy, called cops. The cops showed up and they took him in for questioning. They always start out nicely, and then it deteriorates. So they fooled him out of asking for a lawyer. They really pulled the wool over his eyes. You can see it all unfolding on the interrogation videos. And then they made up their mind right away, that you could hear them talking with each other, and they would say things like, oh, well, obviously that's all pretend grief, So the fact that he assumed she had done this to herself and it was 55 stab wounds, they said to them that was proof that he had done it. They forgot to Mirandize him. And then they ran in after questioning him and Mirandized him, but they kept the stuff that they'd talked about before they Mirandized him. They'd been married for 12 years and they had separated at one point, but they joined a new church together and they got back together and they seemed to be very happy. They'd worked everything out. He had never, ever been accused of anything like bad behavior at home. Betsy, her cancer had returned. It had spread to her liver. She was in really bad shape and really not up to, I think she probably didn't feel well enough to put up a big fight and a resistance with Pam. So Pam spun this whole web of lies. She was the cop's best friend. She had stories to tell. She said, well, Russ was aggressive. I saw it many times. They've been separated 6 or 7 times. Well, the cops never investigated it. It was not true. He was not nice to her verbally, implying that he was verbally abusive. She said that Betsy told her that Russ played a game with Betsy where he would hold a pillow over her face and say, this is what it would be like when you die. She said, he had a real temper, a bad temper. And, she kept pushing and pushing and pushing that this guy was, I'm trying to be careful of the words I use, mistreating his wife. She claimed that Betsy's mother had begged her to take care of this trust money for the girls. It's completely untrue. They didn't ask her, the mother. The extended family didn't like her. She was too pushy. The daughters always looked at her with like, what's she up to? They just didn't really get a good vibe, to put it that way. When they had the first trial, the judge in the trial and the prosecutor had gone to high school together. They had been pals. Pam told them that, in her deposition, that Betsy had asked her to set up a trust for the girls because she didn't trust Russ and she thought the girls were too flighty and they wouldn't take care of the money. At the scene of the crime, there were some real weird things that were not pursued. For example, a pair of Russ's bedroom slippers were found in the closet, put away, and the toes of them had been dipped in blood, but there was no blood on the soles of the feet, and there were no bloody footprints anywhere at all. The photographs with luminol showed there was no blood anywhere. But they did find that her socks had blood on them, but there were no bloody footprints, and the socks were partially off of her, like somebody took off the socks, used them to cover their hands, to hold the slipper, to dip them in blood, put them in the closet, and put the socks back on Betsy. Kind of an awkward setting the scene. There were no polygraph results at all. No phone records about where Pam was or what she was doing at the time. She was the last one to see her alive. So the timeline was established, and then they found reasons to argue with it. So they had 5 alibi witnesses, and they had Russ's phone, all proving that he was where he said he was when he said he was. But the sheriff, who had had an affair with the prosecutor in the past, was kind of in the cahoots with the prosecutors. I said the sheriff's department got sued after all of this and had to settle out of court to save their necks. Nobody looked at alternate theories, like, did somebody else do it? Like, what about the last person to see her alive? They never looked into that. It was not uncommon after trial. The jury was not sequestered, and they'd all go and party at the same bar with the prosecutors and the cops, and they knew each other, a small town. As I said, the judge and the prosecutor were pals. They'd gone to high school together, and their children were on the same team. Pam had a good friend, and now Pam could not be in the courtroom because she was a witness. So she missed a lot of the trial. She had to wait outside, and she was not happy about that. So she convinced her next door neighbor to go into the court as a witness, as a member of the public gallery, and take notes for her and let her know everything that was said and done. But Pam was definitely the star witness, and you can see actual video of her sashaying up to the podium where she gave her testimony. She reveled in being the star witness. She talked to people about the fact that it was going to be on TV. The phone records showed that Pam was not home when she called Betsy to say, I'm home. They made an agreement, according to Pam. I left Betsy. She was fine. I told her I'd call her when I got home. When I got home, I called Betsy and said, hi, Betsy, I got home. And so Betsy was still alive after I left her. So this is Pam's story. The phone doesn't agree with that. The phone shows that she was parked next to Betsy's house when she made the phone call. Pam told the girls, well, I've got control of the money, and I'm not giving you any of it until after the trial. The prosecution got the judge to block the evidence against Pam, to block all the information about the insurance policy, Pam's fact that she was the last one to see Betsy, all of it just got blocked. Pam kind of not brainwashed, but talked Betsy's daughter into testifying, and she was young, and they manipulated her to say bad things about her stepfather, which, really tore her up. Pam testified, and she said that Betsy didn't realize that she had cancer until Pam told her to go to the doctor and discovered that she had cancer. Pam said, Betsy needed me. She described what a burden it was for Pam because I'm disabled. And she limped in and out of the courtroom, but she never limped any other time. But under the eyes of the jury and the cameras, she limped. She described Russ as smoking in the house, even though Betsy was having chemotherapy. He denied it. He didn't smoke in the house. She said Betsy was afraid of him. He was degrading against her. But then she'd say also to the cops, well, I didn't really know him that well, but he was degrading, and he was this and he was that. She claimed that she had a bad memory because she'd had a brain injury. So every time somebody asked her something inconvenient, her brain injury would kick in. She lied and said that Betsy asked for a ride, and Betsy's mother and daughters and sister all knew this was a huge lie. Betsy tried so hard to not go with Pam that night. On cross-examination, the defense showed how Pam had changed her story over time about Betsy's house, about did she go in, like her narrative was, I dropped her off at the curb and I left. I called her when I got home. But then her story changed. Now, she gave that in interviews with the cops. She changed it again and said, I told the cops the real story later, that she'd gone in to the house with Betsy and not stayed in the car. So then she started acting confused. My brain injury is, interfering. The defense is trying to get me to say things that I don't remember because of my brain injury. The judge, who was sympathetic to the prosecution and to Pam, the star witness of the prosecution, told the defense to stop bullying Pam, the witness. Pam made terrible claims about Betsy's daughters, that one of them was on drugs, that the other one had blown a ton of money away. And the daughters were just horrified when they began to realize what was going on with this star witness good friend. One of the daughters wanted to sue her for the things she said about them in court. And the sheriff took the girls aside and said, I'll take care of it. So then Pam found out the Dateline was following the trial. And she freaked out. The Dateline had their censors up and they were questioning people. They wanted to talk to Pam. And Pam got all freaked out, and she found out the Dateline was around because they were talking to her neighbor, her next door neighbor who had been her spy in court. And she said to the neighbors, an older woman, she said to her, don't you dare talk to Dateline. And she did. And according to this docudrama, the neighbor fed squirrels in the neighborhood. And there was this one little squirrel that was sort of semi-tame because she fed it every day. And Pam gave her a gift box, and inside was a dead squirrel. So, keep in mind, this is psychics and psychos. So friends testified that Russ was with them, 5 of his friends. His cell phone tracking agreed with his alibi. So there was 100% reasonable doubt that some other person might have done it because of the game night, because of the phone evidence. Other people, namely Pam, had a motive. The prosecution's closing was all about emotion. Like, he was so terrible. He treated Betsy so badly. We have evidence that he mistreated her. That there was no blood because there'd been a cleanup. He blamed, the prosecution, as the prosecution was a woman. She blamed the friends for aiding and abetting Russ in the crime, that they kept his phone to affect the phone data, that they lied to give him an alibi, that they helped clean up, and just that they helped to orchestrate the timeline in Russ's favor. He was found guilty and went to prison for life without parole. So after that, Kathy Singer, who was the Dateline producer, she finally got to meet with the prosecutor, and Dateline's great. I highly recommend it. They could tell something was up. So Pam, in the meantime, all of a sudden, Pam has money. Pam was always telling people how much money she had, and she always, for years, way before the insurance thing, how much money she had and how she didn't need money. I had money. She liked to brag about it that way. But shortly after the conviction, she suddenly had enough money to have cosmetic surgery, or at least to consult a cosmetic surgeon. And she took all the money out of the trust and put it in her own bank account. So the story goes back in time a little bit to look at Pam's background, to see if we can understand the situation by looking at her background. And it's the classic nature versus nurture. She had an extremely contentious relationship with her mother. A lot of it was about money. Um, was the problem that Pam was born this way? Is it nature? Pulled the trigger because her mother was very bad to her. I have to watch my words here, but I think you get what I'm saying. Did her mother pull the trigger of an already loaded gun that was Pam's personality at birth? Pam was very abusive to her own daughter. Her mother mistreated her, and she was similar to her own daughter. Right? Her daughter peed on herself, and she made her wear the wet underwear on her head when she went places. You know, that's a whole new level of bad parenting. Pam's mother rejected Pam's daughter. She called her the little word that means child born out of wedlock. Her mother was usually drunk. She had a big problem with alcohol. Pam had an affair finally and left her husband for a guy she met in a bar. And they went to Florida and started life in Florida. And Pam picked on her daughter. Her daughter was with her. She picked on her daughter's weight. She gave her a hard time constantly about it, undeservedly. She exploited elderly people around her when they were in Florida. She glommed onto one old lady and got money off of her. Later on, her mother told people about Pam as a child, was always stealing things and lying about it. So there's some reason to believe that this went back really far. So 2 years after the trial, Dateline finally tracked Pam down for her side of the story. And mostly they were able to get her to talk because, lo and behold, Russ got a new trial. His lawyers went to the courts and said that they filed what's called a Mooney motion. And they said that the prosecutors had used perjured testimony to get a conviction and withheld evidence. So they got a new judge. They got a second trial, and they got a new judge. And he agreed to let in all this evidence that had been ignored the first time. So Pam, of course, was willing to talk to Dateline and paint a picture of herself. They also were able to orchestrate a bench trial where there's no jury. You're not having that emotional thing. You know, you've got a judge who's focused on the law, hopefully, and only the law. And it was a different judge. Pam was very upset. She went to the prosecution and tried to, be their star witness again. She had actually given testimony in another suit, and that testimony helped. It was about the money. It was the lawsuit about the money that the family sued her for the money. And, she won. She got to keep the money. And all of her testimony in that suit was allowed in this trial, which was really not good for her. Because it proved, that she was orchestrating keeping the money. And it proved that there was pressure from the police and the prosecution the first time. So it turns out that Pam didn't have plenty of money. They were late on paying their mortgage. They spent almost all of the trust money already shortly after Russ's conviction. Pam implied to the prosecution that this is her next saga, her next episode. Before Russ's second trial, she went back to the prosecution and she said, really, I was playing the role of husband to Betsy because Russ wasn't really there for her. And Betsy, actually, Betsy had a crush on me. And she loved me and she wanted a sexual relationship with me. And I kind of reluctantly became her sex partner. I sacrificed that for her. She said that Betsy was afraid of Russ and what Russ would do if he found out that she and Betsy were having an intimate relationship. And she claimed that Russ got physically aggressive and threatened to stab Betsy while Pam witnessed this one day. The defense found Pam's testimony, and they found the testimony that she said that Russ had threatened to suffocate Betsy with a pillow. And they used for examples in here, to sort of denigrate her as a witness. Pam was competing with her own daughter. There was this terrible scene where the daughter was newly married, and the daughter and the new son-in-law scraped together the money to go into an auction to buy this little rattle-trap house that they were going to fix and turn around and sell, which is something that Pam did. And Pam didn't want the competition, and she couldn't see her daughter succeed. So she bid against her daughter in this auction, and she won the house because she told her daughter, you could never succeed. So the defense found the luminol pictures, the 100 pictures that supposedly had disappeared. They very clearly showed there was no blood cleanup and that the police had lied. So the second trial happened. The defense had a whole new defense. They blamed Pam. They said, she had the opportunity, she had the motive, the money, last person to see her alive. Look at all the lies she's told. Look at her behavior in the past. No one checked her alibi before. Now they did. Nobody checked her phone. Now they did. Nobody checked her financial situation. And now they did. They were able to show that a letter that was found on Betsy's computer asking to make Pam the beneficiary of the money was falsified and put on Betsy's computer from elsewhere. We all wondered where, right? And strategically, they decided they would not put Pam on the stand. The defense would not call Pam, and the prosecutor decided not to call Pam, and Russ was found not guilty, exonerated. Then the prosecutor secretly called to order all the evidence destroyed. Well, one of the people working in the prosecutor's office who didn't really like her boss found out about it, who happened to intercept a form. If the form had been signed, all the evidence would have been destroyed. And she got rid of the form and did not allow it to be destroyed. So Pam was freaking out that there was this Dateline episode about all of this. So her mother had threatened to cut Pam out of her will and to put Pam's daughter instead as the inheritor of the will to make up for the house that Pam's outbid her daughter for. The mom didn't like that. Well, that was the last straw for Pam. They had a horrible relationship, had been ongoing and abusive for a very long time. And the mother was in a really kind of nice assisted living facility. So Pam is upstairs with her mother, encouraging her mother to drink. And then on her way out the door, she stopped at the front desk and she told the people who were running this assisted living, my mother's asleep and she would really request not to be disturbed, and don't go in and check on her in the morning because she wants to sleep in. And then they found that her body was found at the bottom of the balcony. She fell off the balcony and landed and died. Well, she had gone out on the balcony and was very, very drugged and leaned on the balcony. Somebody had cut the balcony, so it no longer provided a barrier, and she went over the edge. So they looked back into Pam's life and they discovered this little tidbit. In 2003, she buried a bunch of money in the Everglades, money she conned from that old lady that she was conning. I don't have the details of how she conned her, what happened to the lady. I don't know. But suffice it to say that she had a ton of money that she got from this woman. Now, her second husband that went to Florida with her was a failed baseball player. And she kind of had him wrapped around her little finger. So she conned this old lady out of the money and buried it in the Everglades, and then went back to Missouri. In 2016, she had been conning for years, it was found out. They did get some security camera evidence. She would go into a store like Walmart and try to return something that she had stolen or used, and she wanted the money back. And she'd been doing this for ages. And as soon as this trial happened and Russ was found not guilty, Pam's face was all over the media. She was in Dateline, you know, and there was a lot of suspicion around her. And this is a small town. She had become infamous, and they wouldn't take her returns in the store anymore. So meantime, this prosecutor, whose last name was Ashke, this woman, she got challenged for the position of prosecutor in the next election. And he ran on a platform of Pam Hupp is guilty. And it's Ashke's fault that she wasn't found guilty yet. So Dateline analyzed the mother's accident. They were the ones who realized that the railing had been cut on purpose. They were the ones who had the mother's toxicology done and found out she was really drugged. They also found out that Pam was heavily into reading true crime novels. Be careful of people who are interested in true crime. She refused to talk with Dateline. She was very upset that she was losing her house business because of Dateline and losing social cachet because of Dateline. She pretended at that point to be the Dateline producer. She got in her car and drove around until she just found a random person in the yard, this woman, and she stopped the car and said, "Do you want to make $1,000?" And she was on purpose driving around like a mobile home park where people obviously could use some money. And she says to this woman, "You want to make some quick money. I'm with Dateline and I need somebody to record a few sound bites in the area for local color. Would you be willing to do that? I can pay you $1,000 cash right away." And the woman was a little bit suspicious, and she let herself be talked into it. But before she got talked into it, she said, I have to go pee or something. And she went into the house, she put a knife in her sleeve, and she called 911 and said, "There's this really weird woman driving around, and this is the car, and this is the license, and I'm getting in the car with her now." So Pam tried again. The woman got away. She just told Pam, I just realized, I just remembered, I've got something I have to do. Let me out of the car. And Pam tried again. And she found a disabled guy in his yard. Now, he had been in an accident, a terrible accident, and truly did have a head injury, and it had affected his ability to think clearly. And when Pam offered him $1,000, he didn't really understand what she meant, but he got in the car with her. And the goal was, she was trying to set somebody up for Betsy's death. She was trying to make it look like Russ had hired somebody to do the crime. Yes, you know, the evidence pointed to him not being there. 5 eyewitnesses, telephone proof. But really, he was the one responsible. So 911 gets a frantic phone call. It's Pam Hupp. She says, "There's somebody just broke into my house and he's trying to attack me." Bang, bang. And they hear, shots. They show up and they find this guy dead on the floor. She claims he broke in. They find a note in his pocket signed by Russ about Betsy. And the cops don't believe her. It's just all weird and they don't believe her. So they take her into the police station. And she says, "Well, look, the police Russ hired that guy to kill me, because of, he really committed the crime and he hired somebody to do the crime for him. And now he's trying to shut me up. And I had to kill him." The police are, for whatever reason, finally not buying it. I think they finally all knew all this other evidence against her. So they called Russ back to Missouri. He had moved to Florida. They called him back to Missouri, and he really didn't want to go, but, his lawyer said, look, just, you have nothing to hide. You didn't do anything wrong. This woman is a menace. Let's go clear this up. So the cops took his DNA. Finally, somebody's doing that. His lawyer went with him and brought with him proof that the day that guy was shot, he was in Florida. He had absolutely nothing to do with it. So Pam packed up, including the money that she had buried. She had dug it up and she sewed it into her. She had a white jacket, those puffy jackets. She sewed it into all the little different puffy compartments of the jacket. And she was going to run. And poor Russ had to sweat it out while the cops checked the second alibi. But they were able to prove that he had nothing to do with it. Pamela was arrested for the murder of this poor man, Louis Gumpenberger. And she told her husband, they're putting the handcuffs on her, marching her out of the house. And she told her husband, I'll see you for dinner. Grandiose. So she gets to the interrogation, and they're taking pictures of it. She denies everything. She denies everything that happened on the security video of the store. She denies anything about the money. She denies about the cell phone evidence. So she's in the interrogation room, and she actually manages to steal a pen that a cop accidentally leaves on the table. And it's really weird. The cops didn't realize it, but they got it on camera, and they were able to watch her she knew she was on camera, and she was able to just, casually put her hand over the pen and shove it in her sleeve. And then she asked, could she go to the bathroom? And they escorted her to the bathroom, but, the door wasn't locked, and she knew it wasn't locked. And she took this pen and stabbed herself multiple times in the neck with the pen. And the cops saved her. But they all said, she never hit a vital blood vessel. She knew that door was unlocked. She set up a situation where she could run around. This might sound a little familiar. Run around with an obvious bandage for a while. She finally ended up, she was charged with Gultenberger. Is that how I say it? Gutenberger? I can't say his name. She was charged with that poor man's murder. And she finally took an Alford plea. An Alford plea is, well, I'm not admitting I'm guilty, but I'm admitting that you can find me guilty. There's enough evidence. But I'm not admitting it, just that you are going to be able to prove it. So she wanted to claim, that she was innocent, and she was given life in prison. Her husband divorced her. So, interesting little twist. Russ came to her, probably her sentencing. And who else came to the sentencing? But the woman she tried to talk into getting in the car. The woman who put the knife in her sleeve and who ended up calling 911 so that the cops knew that Pam was on the prowl. They introduced each other to each other, and they got married. I just think that's a great story. The prosecution, the woman prosecutor, Ashke, she lost the election, and the new prosecutor reopened Betsy's case. Ashke was investigated for prosecutorial misconduct. Pam's mother's death was reopened. In July of 2021, Pam was charged for the murder of Betsy. She's in holding right now, and her trial is scheduled for August of 2026, and they're like this summer, and they're seeking the death penalty. But she's already been sentenced to prison in life for the death of Gumpenberger and the scheme to implicate him, Russ, in Betsy's death. So the psycho that we're talking about seems pretty obvious. There's still a trial to be held. She is guilty of murder. But as with many people, her criminal history is diverse and completely self-serving. I mean, it's cheating people out of money, essentially life insurance fraud. Just I can't talk too much about it because it's alleged and you're innocent until you're proven guilty, but she absolutely killed Louis Guttenberger, and there's a lot to be suspected about her mother's tragic demise and of course Betsy's. So we will follow up on this. Denise and I will get together and do a little psychic look at it, and when she goes through her trial, I'll do a follow-up because I will be very interested. I hope they televise it because she's the star in her own show, that's for sure. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much for watching, and be very careful, cautious around people who watch or read true crime for entertainment. Song of Oil. Slancha.